I had not expected to witness such stillness. Not like this. The reports described a battlefield, scorched and pockmarked from centuries of prior crusades, but they could not have prepared me for what greeted us. The sky above Cyphos 9 was ash-grey, a cold canopy through which no sun shone. Our transport skidded across the desolate plains, thrusters kicking up cinders that fell like snowflakes of rust. Comms were intermittently alive, broadcasting static-laced orders from high command, yet beneath the crackle was something else, a cadence of whispers, faint and alien, threading through the vox like a prayer gone awry. From the ramp, I saw them. The dead, frozen mid-motion. Farmers, soldiers, civilians, faces twisted into silent screams, hands clenched as if clutching invisible horrors. Their postures betrayed panic, despair, and some kind of ritualized obedience. And yet their bodies were strangely intact. No decay, no maggot, no rot, only that impossible stillness. I reported this immediately, voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. Commissar Orlan, reporting. All personnel on surface appear deceased, frozen in place. No vital signs detectable. Suspect temporal or warp anomaly. The words sounded hollow even as they left my mouth. Our first steps were careful, boots crunching against ash and shattered stone. Scouts ahead flickered their lanterns across the battlefield, noting anomalies in compass readings. North spun without reason. Gravimetrics fluctuated. The wind carried a metallic tang, coppery and thick, as though the air itself bled. Ash spiraled in small columns, independent of gravity, twisting upward in eddies that defied logic. I instructed the men to hold formation, yet even in strict discipline, unease seeped through ranks. A ruined village lay ahead, its spires collapsed, streets choked with rubble. In one square, I noticed a series of geometric burns on the walls, circular, triangular, yet connected in patterns my tech priest could not immediately decipher. He muttered under breath, consulting a data slate. This is no ordinance known to the Imperium. This is ritualized energy. I did not like the way his fingers trembled when he traced the symbols. The first casualty of perception occurred shortly thereafter. Scout Orlan vanished mid-step, as if swallowed by the air itself. One moment he was there, hand gripping his lasgun. The next, only a hollow echo of a shout remained, caught in the whispering wind. The men froze, rifles trained on shadows that were not. A faint hum, resonant and pervasive, emanated from the soil beneath our feet. I ordered a perimeter sweep. No trace, only the hum, only the dead. Our exploration revealed a mass grave, shallow, partially uncovered by shifting ash. The cadavers were intact, some already moving in grotesque imitation of life, twitching with unnatural rhythms, sinews contracting and releasing in patterns that mirrored a warped heartbeat. The tech priest measured warp flux. Instruments read impossible readings, fluctuating wildly between negative and positive energy signatures. I noted down coordinates and repeated the mantra of duty, trying to anchor myself in the immutable order of the Imperium. The sensory layers were oppressive, ash-stung nostrils, cold enough to bite into the lungs. Wind whispered in unintelligible syllables, curling around our ears with subtle insistence, like a chant urging compliance. Shadows in broken buildings elongated and flickered. I could not tell which were cast by the corpses and which moved independently. Every few steps the ground shivered faintly, and a low resonance thrummed against my bones. My hand itched to grip my bolt pistol, though I doubted it could defend against this. It was here that we found the first clue of deliberate malevolence. A ceremonial chalice, pristine despite decades of ruin around it, sat atop a stone pedestal embedded in ash. Faint markings traced along its rim suggested liturgical purpose. And when I touched it, a pulse shot through my mind, a vision of the feast, participants writhing in a void where flesh and warp fused. They screamed, yet I could hear their words as if whispered in my own thoughts. The vision ended abruptly, leaving a metallic taste in my mouth and a shiver that did not fade. The men were shaken, some muttering prayers, others staring at the empty air, as if it might respond. My orders remained firm: catalogue, report, observe. Comms were alive again, though distorted. Command demanded immediate survey and containment recommendations. Yet the truth of the world before us felt far from containment. Something here was alive in ways we did not understand, something patient, and it watched. As darkness fell, the ash storm intensified, curling through broken spires and across the frozen bodies like a living shroud. We set temporary shelters, though none could truly feel safe. I recorded the final log for the day. The dead are not dead. The wind speaks secrets, and the chalice pulses still. We are the first to witness this, yet I fear not the last. Tomorrow, we will descend further into the village, into the heart of the corruption, into the feast itself, and I know, with an instinct older than fear, that nothing we bring, no ordinance, no litany, no ritual, will turn the tide. The hinge to the next chapter. In the distance beyond the ash and broken walls, a structure rises, impossibly intact. Its doors, though heavy, seem to beckon, and behind them, the feast awaits. The wind carried whispers again, but this time they were closer, more coherent, threaded with a cadence that made the hair on my neck rise. Scout Allin had vanished hours before, yet the others murmured his name as though prompted by forces unseen. Ash swirled in columns that rose against gravity, defying reason, and the shadows cast by our lanterns twisted as if attempting to escape the light. My hand never left the hilt of my bolt pistol, though I doubted its efficacy against whatever watched from the ruins. The village lay ahead, silent but alive with unseen motion, every building a potential trap, every corner a conduit of dread. The first anomaly presented itself in a collapsed alleyway, walls etched with warp-corrupted symbols, glowing faintly under the flicker of torchlight. The tech priest traced his servo arm across the carvings, muttering, "These are not mere decoration, they resonate with the psyche signature present on this world centuries ago." His voice trembled, betraying fear he would not otherwise admit. I noted the alignment of the symbols' circular patterns surrounding jagged runes, and made a mental record. Something deliberate had been left behind, a message encoded in geometry and energy. We moved cautiously, boots crunching against ash-laden cobblestones. The air was thick with the metallic tang of something long dead, yet vibrant with an unnatural vitality. It clung to our throats, bitter and persistent, forcing us to swallow it with each breath. My squad whispered prayers, reciting the omniscient litanies, yet even these seemed hollow. The hum in the soil beneath our feet grew louder, pulsing with the rhythm of our own hearts, mocking us with an impossible synchronicity. A sudden sharp spike in warp readings drew my attention to the center of the square. There, a mound of bodies shifted, writhing as though the plague that consumed them had gained a perverse sentience. Arms extended unnaturally, fingers contorting to mimic the symbols traced on nearby walls. One of my men, Sergeant Halloway, screamed as the mound responded to his gaze, twitching violently in a manner synchronized with his heartbeat. I barked orders to hold formation, but formation was meaningless here. The dead were not still, they were aware. We established a perimeter, scanning the ruins with voxcasters. Comms crackled, overlaying the static with faint chanting syllables that resonated deep within the mind. I ordered logs to be recorded, documenting every detail, temperature anomalies, gravitational distortions, and the increasingly intelligent motion of the corpses. Every observation reinforced the same conclusion. Sagphos 9 had been engineered to host the feast, a ritual that defied every known law of biology and warp physics. As we approached the village center, a low hum emanated from beneath a fractured stone plinth. I crouched to inspect it, fingers brushing ash that felt almost liquid, warm under the skin. The tech priest extended a manipulator arm to scan the structure. His servo-augmented voice hissed, "This contains residual psychic energy, aligned with the feast ritual. It is a beacon, and it is active." A chill ran along my spine. The notion that the feast was still alive, still pulsing with malevolence, was worse than the dead before us. Then the whispers sharpened, now clearly repeating our own orders in warped mimicry. Scout Fenwick froze mid-step, eyes wide, fingers clutching his lasgun, as though to restrain invisible strings. His mouth moved, forming words I did not recognize, syllables that should not exist in the human tongue. I reached for him, but the moment I touched his shoulder, he convulsed violently, spine arching like a broken relic. A small rune-like protrusion had emerged from his nape, pulsating with faint luminescence. I drew back, reporting to command while simultaneously noting it for the record. The contagion could manipulate the living mind, bending it toward the feast's will. I pressed forward deeper into the ruins, while the tech priest attempted to shield the squad with protective wards. The wards flickered and died, consumed by the overwhelming psychic resonance. Ash swirled violently, forming spirals around corpses that now moved with purposeful cadence. Gravity momentarily failed in localized pockets, boots slipping as the landscape warped beneath us. Each micro-cliffhanger was more harrowing. A collapsed roof suddenly rose, hovering impossibly above us. A wall dissolved into writhing sinew for a heartbeat, before solidifying again. Reality itself was pliant here, reshaped to suit the feast's design. We discovered the first active altar, small but significant. Its base was lined with inscribed runes, stained with a mixture of ash and blood, that remained wet despite decades. On it rested a chalice identical to the one I had touched earlier, its surface thrumming with residual energy. When I reached to inspect, the air thickened, and I felt the pulse of the feast like a heartbeat against my chest. A vision, brief but vivid, struck me. The participants, draped in ceremonial robes, chanting, feeding the contagion to one another in synchronized ecstasy. The vision ended as abruptly as it began, leaving only the hum and my own rapid breathing. Our scouts whispered reports of movement in the shadows, shapes that flickered at the edge of perception. Doors once blocked, now swung open without mechanism. The tech priest noted with alarm that warp readings spiked with each step we took, suggesting the feast was responsive, aware of our intrusion. The last log of the day captures my own dread, recorded in tremulous prose. The dead anticipate us, the feast watches, and the chalice pulses still. As night fell, the ash storm intensified, curling through broken spires and over frozen bodies, as if to remind us that the world itself had been claimed. The village lay ahead, and beyond it, the structure I had glimpsed in the distance beckoned. We were being drawn toward it, not by curiosity, but by compulsion, by some warp-driven insistence that the feast desired our presence. The hinge to the next chapter. The structure's doors, heavy yet strangely open, suggest that the feast has already prepared the next step, and we are its next guests. The structure loomed before us, impossibly intact amid the surrounding ruin, as if it had been preserved by some unnatural will. My boots crunched against ash, every step a reminder that Xiphos 9 was no ordinary battlefield. The air was thick with the metallic tang of decay and the acrid bite of warp-tainted energy. The tech priest's sensors flared repeatedly, reading patterns that defied the laws of geometry and physics. He muttered in Binhuric, "This is the feast, alive, active, prepared for our arrival." I could not argue. The unease in the air was suffocating, thick as the ash that clung to our armor. We entered cautiously, lasguns raised, voxcasters lived to capture any anomalous signal. The interior was a labyrinth of corridors that seemed to shift subtly, doors appearing and disappearing as if the building itself were breathing. Symbols etched into walls pulsed faintly, the same circular sigils I had seen outside, now glowing with an intensity that made the hairs on my neck bristle. I noted the alignment in my log, aware that this was no simple ritual site. It was a conduit, a focal point for the contagion that had consumed the planet. A small group of bodies appeared in a side chamber, arranged in a grotesque tableau. Flesh and metal had fused, sinew grafted into machinery. Eyes open but seeing nothing in our dimension. The tech priest reached forward to examine them, only to recoil as one of the figures twitched unnaturally, its movement synchronized with the pulsing of the room itself. "They are connected," he said, voice trembling. "The feast is not merely infection, it is intelligent, aware." I pressed on, careful to note the environmental anomalies. Gravity shifted locally, causing boots to slide in unpredictable directions. Temperature dropped sharply in pockets, only to rise moments later, burning our skin. The air carried soft chittering, almost like voices of the long dead, yet distinctly alien. Micro-cliffhangers assaulted us with each corridor. A door that had been closed opened to reveal a staircase descending into darkness. A wall dissolved into writhing tissue for a heartbeat, before solidifying again. Every element of the structure screamed the same truth. The feast was not a past event. It was ongoing, responsive, and watch. In a central chamber we discovered the primary altar. Its surface was a mix of stone, bone, and corrupted metal, all fused in intricate patterns. On it rested a chalice identical to the one outside, pulsing faintly with psychic energy. As I reached for it, the air thickened, and the room seemed to contract, pressing against my chest. A vision struck me, participants in ceremonial robes, chanting, feeding the contagion to one another, bodies writhing, sinews knitting with machinery and flesh. The intensity of the pulse mirrored my own heartbeat, and I stumbled back, gasping for air. The tech priest warned that the energy could influence our minds, bending perception and will toward the feast. Scouts reported flickers in peripheral vision, humanoid forms appearing for a moment, then dissolving into shadows. The whispers from the ash storm outside returned, now intelligible yet incoherent, repeating fragments of our own words back to us in warped cadence. The geometric patterns on the walls seemed to resonate with the pulse of the chalice, each vibration carrying a subtle compulsion, urging conformity, participation. I instructed the squad to remain vigilant, but vigilance was tenuous here. The feast demanded more than observation. It demanded submission. As we explored further, we encountered remnants of previous participants. Journals and ritual notes, partially intact, partially corroded by warp influence. The language was alien, yet the meaning was clear. The feast was a ceremony designed to propagate corruption, blending flesh, machine, and psychic resonance to create vessels capable of furthering the contagion. Clues from prior chapters now aligned, the geometric sigils, the recurring numbers, the whispers, all part of a system designed to condition survivors for eventual consumption. Suddenly, a spike in warp readings caused a convulsive tremor in the chamber. Sergeant Halloway fell to the ground, convulsing violently, eyes rolling back. I knelt, gripping his shoulders, but his body twitched in ways no human should, sinews contracting and releasing like mechanical pistons. A small, luminescent growth emerged from his arm, pulsating with the Thay rhythm as the chalice. I barked orders to contain him, but containment was meaningless. The feast did not obey our protocol. We pressed on to a secondary corridor, noticing a subtle shift in the environment. Light seemed to bend around us, corridors lengthening and shortening without consistent measurement. The hum from the altar now extended through the hallways, resonating against the walls and our very bone. Scout Fenwick froze mid-step, mouth moving silently in chant-like motions, fingers tracing symbols in the air. I reached out, and for an instant his eyes reflected the feast itself, a lattice of glowing sigils and pulsing energy. He shuddered, collapsing to the floor, partially overtaken by whatever intelligence animated the dead. A micro cliffhanger struck when the tech priest discovered a hidden hatch beneath the altar. Sensors detected faint life signs, human, yet warped, unstable, synchronized with the psychic resonance of the feast. My heart tightened. If the feast was still active outside, what horrors awaited below? The structure was a conduit, a generator for the contagion, a living extension of the ritual's will. I recorded coordinates, prepared logs, and reinforced the imperative. This knowledge must be transmitted, yet surviving it may not be possible. As night deepened, the corridors pulsed faintly, synchronized with the rhythmic thrum of my own pulse. The whispers coalesced into a single persistent message. Join us. I gritted my teeth, forcing the squad forward, noting that each step deeper aligned with the patterns we had been tracking. Geometric, ritualistic, precise. The final observation of the day, the feast was no mere event. It was an intelligence, alive, and it responded to our intrusion. The hinge to the next chapter. The hatch promises a deeper connection to the ritual, potentially the source of the feast itself. But opening it carries risk beyond comprehension. Whatever lies beneath will test the limits of human perception, military discipline, and sanity itself. We are poised to descend into the heart of the corruption, and there is no turning back. The hatch yawned before us, black and unyielding, yet vibrating faintly with a resonance that suggested awareness. My hand rested on the hilt of my bolt pistol, but instinct whispered that no weapon could oppose what awaited below. The tech priest extended a manipulator, scanning the threshold. His voice, modulated by servo augmentation, carried a tremor as he muttered, "The energy signature. It responds to our presence. It is not static. It is alive." I recorded the observation, committing to logs that might be all that survives of our mission. The corridor beyond the hatch descended into darkness, walls faintly pulsing with warped geometric patterns that seemed to breathe with each step we took. As we descended, the air grew heavier, saturated with the copper tang of blood and the bitter scent of ash. Gravity fluctuated subtly, causing our boots to slide across the metal rungs of the ladder embedded in the hatchway. A low hum penetrated my chest, synchronous with the pulsing of the symbols along the walls. The whispers returned, now fully intelligible in their menace. Fragments of orders we had issued, twisted into litanies commanding compliance, obedience, and sacrifice. Scout Fenwick muttered prayers under his breath, though I suspected they offered no protection. The chamber below was cavernous, larger than any architectural norm could accommodate, stretching into darkness that instruments could not penetrate. Shapes flickered at the periphery of our vision, humanoid figures, elongated and disproportionate, disappearing when directly observed. The tech priest traced his sensors along the walls. Spatial anomalies are severe. Time dilates and contracts. Presence here is being measured against something other than physical laws. I noted it, aware that our concept of distance, orientation, and even sequence was unreliable. Every step felt weighted, yet simultaneously light, as if gravity itself hesitated to obey. Bodies were strewn across the floor, partially fused with machinery and warped architecture. Flesh grafted into walls, veins and wires, intertwining in rhythmic pulses. Some moved subtly, their spines arching in patterns that synchronized with the low hum of the chamber. Sergeant Halloway vomited, clutching his throat, his eyes reflecting the same glowing symbols etched into the walls. The tech priest reached out with a servo arm to touch one of the fused bodies. It twitched violently, lunging as if aware. The feast was not a memory, it was an active entity, responding, calculating, adapting. I pressed forward, marking coordinates in my log while simultaneously recording every anomaly. Gravity continued to fluctuate in microzones, shadows stretched into impossible angles, and temperature oscillated violently. The whispers now spoke directly into my mind, fragments of thoughts and fears I had not yet acknowledged aloud. Every sensory detail intensified, the metallic tang of blood thicker with each breath. The faint vibration of sinew grafted into the walls beneath my feet, the taste of ash that burned as it settled in my lungs. A recursive pattern revealed itself along the walls. The sigils we had seen in previous chambers now rotated in slow synchronization with the pulsing light from the chalice above the hatch. Numbers appeared, etched subtly into the flesh of the walls, 3713. Repeated in spirals and mirrored sequences. The tech priest's voice trembled as he translated them. They are a liturgical equation, a predictive algorithm for the feast's growth. It adapts with intelligence. I shivered, realizing the implication. The structure itself was a vessel, a calculator for contagion and ritual, and it reacted to our intrusion. A sudden tremor shook the chamber, followed by a faint screeching that reverberated through metal and bone. Scout Orland's disappearance became a horrifying possibility as the shadows flickered near the far wall. I barked orders, but even discipline faltered. Micro cliffhangers assaulted us constantly. A doorway appeared, then vanished. A pile of corpses rearranged itself subtly as we watched, forming symbols that echoed the sigils above. Each anomaly was more incomprehensible than the last, eroding confidence in physical law and perception. The central corridor led to a chamber I could only describe as an antechamber to the feast itself. A secondary altar, smaller than the one above, but no less terrifying, stood in the center. Symbols pulsed rhythmically, and the chalice atop it glowed faintly with warp-tainted energy. The tech priest warned that exposure too long could compromise cognition. I watched as Scout Fenwick's eyes rolled back, his body convulsing while fingers traced the sigils in air, tracing the liturgy of an event he had never known. The feast was consuming him slowly, bending both flesh and mind. Suddenly a violent resonance surged from the altar, throwing us off balance. Gravity inverted briefly, tossing my boots from under me. The air itself seemed to thrum, vibrating with a rhythm that echoed the pulse of the sigils. The whispers sharpened into a unified cadence, repeating, "Join us, participate, become one." I gritted my teeth, forcing my squad forward, documenting every detail. Micro cliffhangers assaulted our perception constantly, shadows leaping where no source existed, whispers repeating thoughts I had yet to vocalize, and the environment itself warping to test our resolve. At the chamber's end, a hatch led further into darkness, emanating an intense psychic resonance. The tech priest's sensors went haywire, reading the energy signature of a living ritual core. The source of the feast itself. I noted coordinates and recorded the logs with ritualistic care, knowing this documentation might be the only evidence that Xiphos 9 had ever existed as it truly was. The hinge to the next chapter. Descending through the hatch would bring us face to face with the intelligent core of the feast, where environmental, psychic, and corporeal horror converge, and where the first irreversible transformations are likely to occur. The hatch beneath the antechamber loomed, dark and infinite, resonating with a pulse that matched my own heartbeat. Every fiber of my being screamed to halt, yet duty pressed me forward. My squad moved in formation, lasguns raised, vox casters live, to record anomalies. The tech priest led, scanning every contour, every warp fluctuation. The core, he muttered, servo arm quivering. The feast has a source, an intelligent nucleus. It observes, adapts, consumes. I noted the words in my log, forcing them into the rigid discipline of observation. Though instinct screamed that comprehension was impossible, we descended into the abyss. The hatch opened into a vast, cavernous chamber. The air was dense, tasting of iron and ash, thick enough to cling to lungs and throat. Gravity fluctuated locally. Boots slipped, then pressed too hard as if drawn downward by invisible weight. Shadows flickered, forming shapes that seemed almost human, but stretched and twisted unnaturally. A low hum filled the space, rising and falling in complex rhythm, vibrating bones, sinews and steel alike. Scout Fenwick muttered prayers, yet his voice trembled under the resonance, words catching in his throat as if swallowed by unseen mouths. The chamber floor was a mosaic of flesh and machinery, sinew grafted into cables and bone fused with oxidized metal. Some corpses twitched in synchronized patterns, arching and contracting as if performing the liturgy of the feast. The tech priest extended sensors measuring psychic flux, noting that each motion corresponded to harmonic resonance from the altar above. I stepped carefully, documenting every anomaly, knowing that observation was as much survival as action here. A surge of warp energy drew my attention to a pit at the chamber's center. The void within was lined with a lattice of bone and steel, pulsing with a rhythmic light. It emitted a soft, almost musical tone. Notes that resonated within the mind, tugging at fear, curiosity, and obedience in equal measure. Scout Olin's absence became horrifyingly plausible, as shapes flickered near the pit's rim, humanoid but grotesquely elongated, eyes glowing with intelligence that mirrored the feast. I barked orders, but instinct faltered, even disciplined formations bent under the psychic pressure. We approached cautiously, aware that proximity alone might trigger the entity. The tech priest warned, the source evaluates intent, it adapts to our perceptions, our emotions, our fears. Exposure beyond a threshold compromises cognition. Proceed at caution. I pressed on, documenting coordinates, environmental readings and anomalous phenomena. Gravity shifted in micro pockets, shadows stretched and twisted independently. Air oscillated with subtle warmth and sudden chill, each fluctuation synchronized with the pulse of the pit. The whispers intensified, coherent yet incomprehensible. They repeated fragments of our own thoughts back to us, layered with alien syntax and warped cadence. Scout Fenwick's body convulsed, fingers tracing symbols in the air, eyes reflecting the lattice of bone and steel. A luminescent protrusion emerged from his spine, pulsating in rhythm with the pit's core. I restrained him, recording every detail, noting that the feast's influence now reached beyond the dead. It was actively manipulating the living. A micro cliffhanger struck when a section of the chamber floor dissolved briefly, revealing writhing tendrils composed of sinew and wire, reaching for our boots. Sergeant Holloway shouted orders, yet his voice faltered as the tendrils recoiled only to reform in different patterns. The tech priest warned that the floor itself was a conduit, transmitting psychic resonance from the core to manipulate those above. We held formation, though every second in the chamber eroded confidence, perception, and discipline. An unexpected discovery emerged. Fragments of prior participants' logs, partially fused into the lattice of bone and metal. They described the feast as a ritual designed to propagate itself, blending flesh, psychic energy, and machine. The geometric sigils, numbers and chants now aligned. Everything we had observed outside and in previous chambers was preparation for this apex. Each clue from prior exploration revealed a new layer of the feast's design: intelligent, adaptive, ritualized. Suddenly, a violent surge shook the chamber, throwing me against the lattice rim. The tendrils quivered violently, and the shadows flickered into coherent humanoid forms. They mirrored our movements, anticipated gestures, and subtly manipulated perception. Walls stretched, corridors reoriented. The air thickened or thinned unpredictably. The tech priest cried warnings of psychic overload. Even my mind began to fracture under the resonance, perception splintering between reality and hallucination. At the rim of the pit, I glimpsed the chalice, identical to those above, now suspended mid-air by warp-touched forces. It pulsed with intense psychic energy, drawing the air, sound, and even our thoughts toward it. The whispers coalesced into a single command: approach, submit, participate. I forced myself to record logs with ritualistic care, noting that any hesitation could invite psychic predation. Micro-cliffhangers assaulted our senses constantly. Tendrils lunged unpredictably, shadows flickered into partially human forms, and the lattice emitted pulses that synchronized with our heartbeats. The hinge to the next chapter, descending fully into the pit, promises direct confrontation with the feast's core. Environmental, psychic, and corporeal horrors converge here, and irreversible transformations are imminent. We are at the threshold of comprehension and madness. Every observation, every step, reinforces that the feast is alive, adaptive, and aware. Survival may depend not on firepower or ritual, but on understanding the liturgical calculus encoded into the very lattice we now face. We descended into the pit, and the world above seemed to vanish, replaced by a void of shifting shadows and oppressive resonance. The lattice of bone and steel enveloped us, its pulse now dominating every sensory input. Gravity fluctuated violently, pulling boots from beneath our feet, then slamming them down with sudden force. The air vibrated, dense and metallic, carrying whispers that had coalesced into a language at once alien and familiar. Each syllable scraped at the mind, eroding confidence and sowing hesitation. The tech priest's manipulator arms quivered uncontrollably as he scanned, reporting distortions in spatial, temporal, and psychic metrics. Bodies adorned the walls, fused with wires and bone, sinew contracting in rhythm with the lattice pulse. Some moved in subtle choreography, others convulsed in irregular spasms that hinted at consciousness. Sergeant Halloway recoiled, gagging as the floor beneath his boots rippled like liquid, forming grotesque shapes that grasped at ankles and armor. I ordered the squad to hold formation, but the feast tested discipline at every heartbeat. Shadows that moved contrary to light, corridors that extended impossibly, whispers repeating thoughts not yet spoken aloud. Observation was survival, and yet perception betrayed us continuously. The central chamber within the pit revealed the feast's epicenter, a throne of bone fused with machinery, atop which rested the primary chalice. It emitted a pulsating psychic resonance, drawing air, sound, and thought toward it. Scout Fenwick's eyes reflected the lattice of the throne, his hands tracing sigils in midair, fingers twitching as if manipulated by invisible strings. I documented each anomaly, noting the feast's intelligence. It anticipated movement, adapted to thought, and manipulated perception to ensure compliance. This was no passive ritual. It was active, aware, and predatorily sentient. The tech priest warned that exposure to the core for more than moments risked cognitive compromise. I forced myself to log coordinates, energy readings, and environmental anomalies with meticulous precision. Gravity pockets shifted violently. Temperature oscillated between freezing chill and stifling warmth, and the air throbbed with a frequency that made bones ache. The whispers sharpened, repeating fragments of our commands and fears, layering them with warped syntax. Scout Olan's absence haunted me. This intelligence consumed, adapted, and perhaps already had him within its lattice. Suddenly the floor convulsed, rising into a mound that twisted with sinew, bone, and metallic appendages. It moved in synchronization with the throne's pulse, forming partial humanoid shapes that mirrored our positions. The tech priest shouted warnings, but even he trembled under the psychic strain. A tendril lashed outward, wrapping around Sergeant Halloway's arm. Flesh grafted seamlessly to the sinew, and he convulsed violently as his spine arched unnaturally. I fired my bolt pistol, but the lattice absorbed kinetic energy. The creature did not pause, did not falter. The feast was not bound by physical law. It responded only to thought, perception, and will. As we pressed forward, fragments of prior participants' logs embedded in the lattice revealed the feast's purpose: propagation through ritualized consumption of mind and body, fusing flesh, psychic resonance, and machine. The geometric sigils, numeric patterns, and chants we had observed earlier were preparations, calibration, and command structures encoded into space itself. Every step we had taken aligned with the feast's design, confirming that it had been calculating, observing, and adapting for centuries. Micro cliffhangers assailed us relentlessly, shadows leaping where no source existed, tendrils forming partially human shapes, walls bending, corridors stretching and contracting unpredictably. Scout Fenwick convulsed violently, his eyes reflecting sigils pulsing with the core's rhythm. A luminescent growth protruded from his chest, pulsating in precise sync with the chalice. I restrained him, noting that the feast now influenced not only perception, but physical form. Micro cliffhangers compounded with each pulse. A tendril lashed at my boots, a shadow flickered to mimic a squad member, and whispers repeated my own thoughts back to me in warped cadence. The tech priest measured psychic flux and muttered that we were approaching the threshold of irreversible transformation. I forced the squad forward, documenting every anomaly with ritualistic care. Gravity shifts, temperature oscillations, and spatial distortions persisted, all synchronized with the throne's pulsing core. The whispers, layered upon thoughts, subtly compounding fear, curiosity, and the compulsion to approach. Each step brought us closer to the intelligence at the feast's heart. Yet survival demanded observation, detachment, and strict adherence to protocol. I recorded environmental data, personnel responses, and psychic resonance patterns with meticulous precision, knowing that the logs might be all that survived. The hinge to the next chapter, descending to the throne's base, will bring us into direct confrontation with the feast's intelligence. Environmental, psychic, and corporeal horrors converge here, and the first irreversible transformations are imminent. The feast is alive, adaptive, and aware, responding to intrusion with both micro and macro manipulations. Survival is no longer guaranteed. Observation is insufficient. Every decision, every hesitation, every heartbeat carries consequences. The ritual's apex awaits, and the next chapter promises confrontation, revelation, and escalation beyond comprehension. The base of the throne pulsed with an intensity that made the walls of the chamber quiver. Every step closer felt like walking into the marrow of the universe. Each heartbeat synchronized with the core's rhythmic pull. Gravity shifted unpredictably, tossing boots into the air, only to slam them down again with bone-jarring force. The whispers had become coherent commands, repeating fragments of our orders, our fears, our doubts, twisting them into liturgical chants meant to compel obedience. The tech priest's manipulator arms quivered violently as he measured psychic flux. Thresholds are exceeded. The feast is aware of all intent, he warned. I recorded the warning, heart hammering in recognition of its deadly truth. Courses grafted into walls and floor twisted violently as we advanced. Flesh and metal fused in impossible ways, sinews contracting rhythmically in time with the core's pulse. The air tasted metallic, acrid, burning lungs with each breath. Scout Fenwick convulsed again, his body twitching involuntarily as the luminescent protrusions along his spine pulsed in perfect synchronization with the chalice above. Each pulse felt like a command, an invisible hand probing our minds for weakness. I barked orders to maintain formation, though even discipline faltered under the feast's pervasive influence. Suddenly the floor beneath Sergeant Halloway rippled violently, forming tendrils that wrapped around his legs and torso. Flesh fused to sinew and wire, yet he remained conscious, screaming incoherently. I fired my bolt pistol, but the lattice absorbed the kinetic energy, reshaping around the impact with no visible damage. The feast did not adhere to physical law, it responded only to thought, perception, and psychic intent. Micro cliffhangers assaulted us continuously. Shadows flickered to mimic squad members, doors appeared and vanished, and corridors warped unpredictably. Each anomaly tested our resolve, perception, and mental fortitude. The tech priest extended a sensor to the throne's base. Core structure: intelligent, reactive. It measures psychic signatures, emotional output, tactical thought. Prolonged exposure may induce irreversible transformation. I nodded grimly, noting coordinates and environmental readings in meticulous detail. Observation was now survival. The geometric sigils, numbers, and litanies, previously recorded, aligned perfectly with the pulse of the throne. Every earlier clue revealed itself as a calibration mechanism, preparing the feast to manipulate perception, environment, and flesh for maximum efficacy. I forced the squad forward, documenting each anomaly with ritualistic precision. Gravity shifts became violent. Air oscillated between freezing chill and suffocating warmth, and shadows contorted independently of light sources. The whispers repeated thoughts not yet spoken aloud, layering fear, curiosity, and compulsion. Each step drew us closer to the intelligence animating the feast's core. Yet survival demanded observation, detachment, and strict adherence to protocol. Every micro cliffhanger reinforced the lethal intelligence behind the ritual. Tendrils, whispers, shadows, and warped architecture acted in concert. Scout Fenwick's body convulsed violently, fingers tracing sigils in midair, eyes reflecting the lattice of bone and steel. A luminescent growth emerged from his chest, pulsating rhythmically with the chalice. I restrained him, recording every detail. The feast now actively manipulated the living, blending corporeal and psychic influence. Sergeant Holloway screamed again as a tendril laced around his spine, reshaping his body into grotesque alignment with the lattice. Observation became a delicate balance. Too close risked psychic invasion, too distant forfeited understanding. At the rim of the throne, I glimpsed the chalice suspended in warp-touched levitation. Its pulse dominated the chamber, synchronizing air, sound, and thought. Whispers coalesced into a singular command: approach, submit, become one. I forced myself forward, logging coordinates, psychic flux, environmental anomalies, and squad responses with meticulous care. Every step carried risk. Minor hesitation amplified by the feast's intelligence could lead to psychic predation or corporeal transformation. Micro cliffhangers continued without pause. Shadows leapt where no source existed. Tendrils lashed unpredictably, and the lattice emitted pulses matching our heartbeats. The core's intelligence became clearer. The feast was adaptive, calculating, and ritualistic. Every anomaly we had encountered, gravity fluctuations, whispering, environmental oscillations, corporeal fusion, was a test, a method of conditioning for eventual submission or consumption. Each prior observation now aligned with the ritual's apex, confirming that the feast had been observing, calculating, and manipulating for centuries. The micro cliffhangers and environmental distortions were deliberate, teaching us the limits of perception and control. The hinge to the next chapter: engaging the chalice at the throne's apex will force direct confrontation with the feast's intelligence. Environmental, psychic, and corporeal horror converge, and irreversible transformation is imminent. The feast is alive, adaptive, and aware, responding to intrusion with both subtle manipulations and overt threats. Survival is no longer assured. Observation is insufficient. Every decision, hesitation, and heartbeat carries lethal consequences. The next chapter promises confrontation, revelation, and escalation beyond human comprehension, testing discipline, courage, and the limits of the mind itself. The air at the throne's apex thickened, vibrating with a frequency that seemed to synchronize with my heartbeat. Each pulse echoed through the chamber, reverberating in bone, sinew, and metal. Shadows stretched and contracted independently of any light source, and the whispers had evolved into coherent litanies, repeating our fears, doubts, and thoughts in a cadence that demanded obedience. The tech priest's manipulator arms trembled as he measured psychic flux. Exposure beyond this threshold will compromise cognition irreversibly, he warned. I logged the warning meticulously, noting the necessity of precise documentation even as instinct screamed for caution. We advanced toward the chalice, each step an exercise in defiance against the feast's pervasive influence. Gravity fluctuated violently. Boots lifted from the floor only to be slammed down moments later. The floor rippled subtly underfoot, tendrils of sinew and wire brushing against our armor with intent, testing reaction time and focus. Corpse forms grafted into walls twitched in synchronized patterns, their eyes following every movement, reflecting a terrible intelligence that mirrored the pulse of the chalice. Observation had become survival. Every sensory input now carried the weight of the feast's predation. Scout Fenwick convulsed violently, his fingers tracing sigils in midair, eyes reflecting the lattice pulse. A luminescent protrusion grew along his spine, vibrating in exact synchronization with the chalice. I restrained him, recording every detail in the log, noting that the feast's influence now extended beyond the dead to the living. Sergeant Halloway screamed again as tendrils wrapped around his spine, fusing flesh and sinew with metallic grafts. I fired my bolt pistol at the nearest appendages, but kinetic force was irrelevant. The lattice absorbed energy, reshaping around impacts as if mocking physical law. The whispers intensified, layering multiple voices over one another in a chorus of menace. They repeated fragments of our commands, our fears and our unspoken thoughts, blending them into ritualistic incantations designed to compel compliance. Shadows flickered to mimic squad members, corridors stretched and contracted unpredictably, and gravity oscillated in micro-pockets, throwing balance into chaos. Every step forward reinforced the feast's intelligence, adaptive, responsive, ritualized, and predatorily sentient. Micro-cliffhangers assaulted perception relentlessly. The tech priest extended a sensor to measure psychic resonance from the chalice. Readings spiked beyond the limits of calibration. The core, he warned, is sentient. It perceives intent, evaluates thought, and manipulates perception to ensure conformity or destruction. I documented coordinates, environmental anomalies, and personnel reactions with meticulous care. The geometric sigils and numeric patterns etched into walls and floor now aligned with the chalice's pulse. Every prior clue, the sequences, chants, whispers, had been preparation, calibration, and test for engagement at this apex. Gravity shifted violently, throwing boots from beneath our feet. Shadows flickered into humanoid shapes that mirrored our movements and subtly manipulated perception, forcing missteps. Scout Fenwick's body arched violently as his spine pulsed with luminous energy. The growth extended into his chest, merging with sinew and armor. Sergeant Halloway convulsed under tendrils that fused flesh and metal. The feast was no passive anomaly. It was an active predator, responding to thought, movement, and fear. Observation alone was insufficient. Engagement demanded balance, discipline, and unwavering composure. As I stepped closer to the chalice, the lattice around the throne pulsed violently. Whispers coalesced into a single directive: approach, submit, become one. Each syllable struck deep into the mind, compelling obedience through fear, curiosity, and fascination. The tech priest measured psychic flux continuously, noting that prolonged exposure could induce irreversible transformation. I logged environmental fluctuations meticulously: temperature swings, gravity oscillations, spatial distortions, and corporeal grafting of tendrils were all synchronized with the chalice's pulse. Every anomaly was both a test and a warning. Courses grafted into walls and floor twitched rhythmically, eyes following movement with sentient awareness. Tendrils reached, not indiscriminately, but selectively, probing for hesitation or weakness. Shadows flickered into partially human forms, replaying prior actions in grotesque mimicry. Observation, note-taking, and adherence to protocol had become the only weapons against the feast's intelligence. Every micro-cliffhanger tested perception, discipline, and resolve. Limbs twisting unnaturally, whispers echoing unspoken thoughts, gravity pulling in impossible directions. The hinge to the next chapter. Engagement with the chalice will force direct confrontation with the feast's sentient core. Environmental, psychic, and corporeal horror converge, and irreversible transformations are imminent. The feast responds adaptively to intrusion, manipulating perception, environment, and flesh simultaneously. Survival is no longer guaranteed. Observation alone cannot suffice. Every step, hesitation, and heartbeat carries lethal consequences. The next chapter promises direct interaction, escalation beyond comprehension, and confrontation with the ritual's intelligence, pushing mind, body, and squad to their ultimate limits. The chalice hovered above the throne, suspended by forces that defied comprehension, pulsing with warp-tainted energy that reverberated through bone, flesh, and metal alike. Each pulse carried the weight of centuries, intelligence encoded into rhythm and light. Shadows stretched unnaturally, flickering across walls and floor, morphing into semi-human forms that mirrored our movements. The whispers had coalesced into a coherent directive: approach, submit, become one. Every syllable penetrated the mind, tugging at fear, curiosity, and obedience. The tech priest's manipulator arms quivered violently, scanning psychic resonance beyond calibration. Direct interaction will compromise cognition irreversibly, he warned, and I logged the observation with meticulous ritualistic care. Gravity shifted violently as we advanced, pulling boots from the floor, slamming them down again, then reversing direction without warning. The chamber seemed alive, reacting to intent, anticipation, and hesitation. Courses grafted into walls writhed, sinew and metal fusing in impossible patterns, reflecting the lattice's rhythmic pulse. Tendrils reached out selectively, probing for hesitation or weakness, twisting around limbs and armor, testing resolve. Observation alone became a precarious defense. Any lapse in attention or protocol risked psychic or corporeal compromise. Scout Fenwick convulsed violently, his eyes reflecting the lattice and chalice in pulsing sync. Luminescent protrusions along his spine expanded, weaving into the sinew around him. Sergeant Halloway screamed as tendrils wrapped his torso, fusing flesh and metal. I fired my bolt pistol repeatedly, but kinetic energy was irrelevant. The lattice absorbed and reconfigured around impacts. The feast's intelligence was not passive, it was predatorily adaptive, responding to thought, movement, and perception with deliberate precision. Each micro-cliffhanger assaulted sight, sound, and proprioception, shadows shifting independently, corridors stretching unpredictably, whispers repeating unspoken fears. The tech priest extended sensors toward the chalice. Readings spiked beyond threshold limits. It perceives intent, evaluates thought, manipulates perception to compel submission or destruction, he reported. I documented coordinates, environmental readings, psychic flux, and personnel responses. Every anomaly, from gravity fluctuations to corporeal grafting, aligned with the feast's ritualized intelligence. Each previous observation, the sigils, chants, numeric sequences, revealed preparation for this apex confrontation. Micro-cliffhangers escalated tension continuously, tendrils lashing unpredictably, shadows mimicking squad members, environmental shifts assaulting every sense. Fenwick's body arched violently, fingers tracing sigils mid-air, pulsing in rhythm with the chalice. Luminescent growths expanded across his chest and arms, merging with sinew and armor. I restrained him, recording every movement and psychic spark. The feast's influence had now extended beyond the dead. It manipulated the living, bending flesh and cognition simultaneously. Halloway convulsed as tendrils fused into his spine, reshaping his body grotesquely. Observation required balance. Proximity risked psychic predation. Distance forfeited comprehension. Every micro-cliffhanger reinforced the lethal intelligence of the feast. As I stepped closer to the chalice, the chamber seemed to contract and expand simultaneously. Whispers layered over one another, echoing our thoughts and fears, blending into ritualistic incantations compelling submission. Shadows flickered into humanoid forms, replaying prior movements in grotesque mimicry. The lattice pulsed violently in response to our presence, synchronizing gravity, temperature, and psychic resonance with the chalice. Observation, note-taking, and strict adherence to protocol had become the only defenses against the feast's intelligence. Each micro-cliffhanger tested mental and physical resilience. Limbs twisting unnaturally, corridors stretching, tendrils probing, whispers reflecting unspoken thoughts. The central chalice pulsed brighter, drawing air, sound, and cognition toward it. The tech priest measured psychic flux continuously, warning of irreversible transformation. I logged environmental fluctuations with obsessive precision, gravity oscillations, temperature swings, corporeal grafting, spatial distortion, all synchronized with the chalice's rhythm. Each anomaly was a deliberate test and warning, designed to evaluate our resilience, obedience, and cognitive limits. The feast's intelligence became undeniable. Every prior anomaly, every whispered litanies, every micro cliffhanger was a test. Gravity shifts, corporeal grafting, environmental distortion, and psychic assaults were purposeful, conditioning, testing, adapting. The geometric sigils, numeric patterns, and chants that had seemed random now revealed alignment, forming a calculated ritual to ensnare both body and mind. Each step closer confirmed the feast's predatorily sentient awareness, its intelligence rooted in adaptation and ritualized precision. The hinge to the next chapter. Direct contact with the chalice will force irreversible psychic and corporeal transformations. Environmental, psychic, and bodily horror converge simultaneously. The feast adapts to intrusion, manipulating perception, movement, and thought in real time. Survival is no longer guaranteed. Observation and protocol may be insufficient. Every hesitation, heartbeat, and decision carries consequences, forcing confrontation with the full, sentient intelligence behind the ritual. The next chapter promises escalation into irreversible horror, moral and tactical dilemmas, and direct interaction with the feast's apex intelligence. The moment I touched the edge of the chalice, a surge of psychic resonance tore through the chamber, disorienting thought and perception simultaneously. Gravity inverted briefly, throwing boots from beneath us, then slammed us down with bone-jarring force. Shadows elongated violently, flickering into humanoid forms that mirrored our movements but twisted in impossible ways. The whispers had fused into a singular directive: submit, become one, serve the feast. Each syllable pierced cognition, tugging at fear, obedience, and curiosity simultaneously. The tech priest screamed cautions, but his voice became distorted, stretched by the lattice's pulse. I logged every anomaly, with obsessive precision, knowing the feast would exploit even the smallest hesitation. Scout Fenwick convulsed violently as his spine and chest pulsated with luminous growths. Tendrils erupted from the floor and walls, lashing at our limbs, intertwining flesh, sinew, and metal. Sergeant Halloway screamed as his body fused grotesquely with the lattice, each pulse synchronizing with the chalice. I fired my bolt pistol repeatedly, but impacts were irrelevant. The lattice absorbed and reconfigured every strike. The feast's intelligence was active, adaptive, predatorily sentient. Every micro cliffhanger assaulted vision, hearing, and proprioception, shadows moving independently, corridors stretching unpredictably, whispers echoing thoughts not yet vocalized. The floor beneath me shifted violently, forming a mound of sinew and metal that attempted to integrate my armor and flesh. I resisted, recording every moment. The tech priest extended manipulators toward the chalice, readings spiking beyond any previous calibration. The core, sentient, evaluates intent, manipulates perception, transforms organic matter, he warned, voice trembling under psychic pressure. I logged coordinates, environmental data, and psychic flux with ritualistic care, documenting each micro cliffhanger and corporeal anomaly in meticulous detail. Fenwick's body arched violently, fingers tracing sigils mid-air, pulsing in exact rhythm with the chalice. His chest and spine had fused with sinew, metallic grafts, and luminous growths. The feast now reached beyond the dead, actively manipulating the living. Holloway convulsed as tendrils fused into his torso and spine, reshaping his body grotesquely. Observation alone had become a fragile defense. Proximity risked psychic predation. Distance forfeited understanding. Every second brought micro cliffhangers, limbs twisting unnaturally, shadows mimicking squad members, corridors warping, whispers reflecting unspoken thought. The chalice pulsed brighter, drawing air, sound, and thought toward it. The tech priest continuously monitored psychic flux, warning of irreversible transformation. Gravity oscillated violently. Temperature swung between freezing and suffocating, and shadows flickered into humanoid forms that mirrored past movements. Each anomaly was deliberate, conditioning, testing, adaptation. Every micro cliffhanger increased tension and exposed weakness, probing for hesitation, fear, and moral compromise. The feast's intelligence became undeniable. Every anomaly we had observed, the whispers, sigils, gravity shifts, tendril formations, was purposeful. Each prior clue revealed preparation, calibration, and conditioning for direct interaction. Observation, note-taking, and adherence to protocol had become the only defenses against the feast's predatorily sentient core. Each step closer confirmed its awareness, its intelligence rooted in adaptation, ritual, and consumption of mind and body. A sudden surge of warp energy threw me into the lattice, sinew and metal. Attempting to graft onto my armor, I forced myself upright, documenting environmental changes. Air density, temperature oscillation, psychic spikes, spatial distortion, and corporeal grafting. Every action, hesitation, and heartbeat carried lethal consequences. Shadows flickered, whispering thoughts not yet voiced, luring curiosity, exploiting hesitation, demanding compliance. The feast's apex intelligence was now actively engaging us, testing cognition, resolve, and discipline simultaneously. Fenwick screamed as his luminous growths fused further into sinew and armor, the lattice responding to his fear, compulsion, and thoughts. Holloway's spine twisted grotesquely under tendril pressure. I forced myself to continue observation and documentation, aware that the next moments could produce irreversible psychic or corporeal transformation. Micro cliffhangers assaulted all senses, gravity inversion, tendrils lashing unpredictably, shadows mimicking movements, whispers reflecting unspoken fears. Each anomaly was a deliberate test of our limit. The hinge to the next chapter. Confrontation with the chalice's apex intelligence will produce irreversible transformations and escalate horror to its maximum. Environmental, psychic, and corporeal phenomena converge, forcing moral, tactical, and survival dilemmas. Observation alone is insufficient. Every decision carries immediate and permanent consequences. The next chapter promises escalation into full interaction with the feast's intelligence, testing discipline, courage, and cognition against predatorily adaptive, sentient ritual. The chalice pulsed with such intensity that the lattice trembled violently, throwing us into disarray. Gravity oscillated unpredictably. Boots lifted and slammed with bone-jarring force. Shadows flickered, forming humanoid silhouettes that twisted unnaturally, mimicking our movements in grotesque parody. The whispers had fused into an incessant litany: submit, become one, serve the feast. Each syllable penetrated mind and marrow alike, tugging at fear, obedience, and curiosity. The tech priest's manipulator arms quivered violently. Cognition is failing. Exposure beyond this threshold is irreversible, he reported. I recorded every anomaly meticulously, knowing that even hesitation could invite immediate predation. Scout Fenwick's convulsions intensified. Luminescent growths along his spine and chest now intertwined with sinew and metal, pulsating with perfect synchronization to the chalice. Sergeant Holloway's screams echoed as tendrils wrapped around his torso and spine, reshaping him grotesquely, integrating flesh with the lattice. I fired my bolt pistol repeatedly, but the lattice absorbed energy, reforming seamlessly. The feast was not bound by physical law. It responded only to cognition, intent, and fear. Micro cliffhangers assaulted every sense, shadows leaping independently, whispers echoing unspoken thoughts, corridors stretching and compressing unpredictably. The floor beneath me shifted violently, sinew and metal twisting toward my armor. I resisted, documenting every movement and psychic fluctuation. The tech priest extended manipulators toward the chalice. Readings spiked beyond all previous calibration. It perceives intent, evaluates thought, manipulates perception to compel submission or destruction, he warned. I logged coordinates, psychic flux, and environmental anomalies with ritualistic precision, noting each micro cliffhanger and corporeal event. Observation was no longer passive. It had become the only defense. The chalice's pulse intensified, drawing air, sound, and thought toward it. The lattice reacted instantly, synchronizing gravity, temperature, spatial distortion, and corporeal grafting. Shadows flickered into humanoid forms, replaying prior movements in grotesque mimicry. Every prior observation, the sigils, chants, numeric patterns, was now revealed as preparation, calibration, and conditioning for this apex confrontation. Observation, note-taking, and adherence to protocol had become survival mechanisms against a predatorily sentient core. Fenwick arched violently, his fingers tracing sigils mid-air, pulsing in precise rhythm with the chalice. Luminescent growths expanded, fusing further into sinew, armor, and flesh. The feast's influence now extended fully to the living. Holloway's spine twisted grotesquely under tendril pressure. Observation required balance. Proximity risked psychic predation. Distance forfeited comprehension. Micro cliffhangers compounded relentlessly. Limbs twisting, shadows mimicking, corridors warping, whispers reflecting unspoken fears. Every second tested cognitive, moral, and physical endurance. The tech priest warned that exposure beyond moments risked irreversible transformation. I continued documentation obsessively. Gravity oscillations, temperature swings, psychic spikes, spatial distortions, and corporeal grafting all synchronized with the chalice's rhythm. Each anomaly was a deliberate test, an evaluation of fear, curiosity, and obedience. The feast's intelligence was adaptive, predatorily sentient, and ritualized. Each step forward confirmed its awareness and deliberate manipulation of our perception, movement, and cognition. A sudden surge of warp energy erupted from the chalice. Tendrils lashed violently, wrapping around Fenwick, Holloway, and myself. Luminescent growths expanded rapidly, fusing sinew, flesh, and armor in grotesque patterns. Shadows flitted across walls, forming human-like figures, each mirroring movement, while distorting reality. The whispers became unbearable, layering multiple voices, repeating unspoken thoughts, transforming perception into terror. Micro cliffhangers assaulted all senses, disorienting and conditioning simultaneously. Observation became a weapon and a shield. Every recorded anomaly could be the difference between survival and assimilation. I forced myself forward, documenting each psychic spike, each environmental distortion, each tendril lash. Fenwick's body arched violently as the lattice pulsed, integrating him further. Holloway convulsed, twisting into grotesque alignment with the sinew metal lattice. The tech priest measured psychic flux continuously, reporting readings beyond comprehension. Each micro cliffhanger reinforced the feast's predatorily sentient intelligence, adaptive, ritualized, and lethal. Observation, discipline, and meticulous recording had become the only safeguards against immediate destruction or transformation. The hinge to the next chapter. Approaching the chalice fully will trigger irreversible corporeal and psychic assimilation. The feast adapts in real time, manipulating perception, movement, thought, and flesh simultaneously. Survival is no longer guaranteed. Observation and protocol may not suffice. Every hesitation, decision, and heartbeat carries permanent consequences. The next chapter promises full confrontation with the feast's apex intelligence, escalation into irreversible horror, and the first critical moral and tactical dilemmas for the squad. The chalice loomed above the throne, pulsing with an intensity that distorted perception and gnawed at cognition. Gravity oscillated violently, tugging boots from beneath our feet, and slamming them down in chaotic rhythm. Shadows stretched and twisted independently, forming humanoid parodies of ourselves. The whispers had fused into a single command: submit, become one, serve the feast. Each syllable struck deep into the mind, exploiting fear, obedience, and morbid curiosity. The tech priest's manipulator arms shivered violently as he measured psychic flux. Exposure beyond this point will irreversibly compromise cognition, he warned. I logged the warning meticulously, noting that hesitation could invite immediate predation. Scout Fenwick convulsed violently. Luminescent growths along his spine, chest, and limbs now wove into sinew and metal, pulsating in perfect synchronization with the chalice. Sergeant Holloway screamed as tendrils fused grotesquely into his torso and spine, reshaping his body into alignment with the lattice. I fired my bolt pistol, but kinetic energy was meaningless. The lattice absorbed and reformed around each strike. The feast's intelligence was predatorily adaptive, responding instantly to thought, perception, and action. Micro cliffhangers assaulted every sense, shadows shifting independently, whispers echoing unspoken thoughts, corridors stretching and compressing unpredictably. The floor beneath me convulsed violently, sinew and metal rising to attempt integration with my armor. I resisted, documenting every movement, environmental change, and psychic spike. The tech priest extended his manipulators toward the chalice. Readings spiked beyond calibration. It evaluates intent, manipulates perception, and transforms organic matter, he warned. I logged coordinates, psychic flux, environmental anomalies, and squad responses with obsessive care. Observation was now the only defense against the feast's predatorily sentient core. The chalice pulsed brighter, drawing air, sound, and thought toward it. The lattice synchronized gravity, temperature, spatial distortion, and corporeal grafting. Shadows flitted into humanoid forms, replaying prior movements in grotesque mimicry. Every prior anomaly, the sigils, chants, numeric patterns, revealed preparation and conditioning for this apex confrontation. Observation, note-taking, and adherence to protocol had become survival mechanisms against the feast. Fenwick's body arched violently, fingers tracing sigils mid-air, pulsing with the chalice. Luminescent growth spread further, integrating sinew, armor, and flesh. The feast now influenced the living fully. Holloway convulsed, spine twisting grotesquely under tendril pressure. Observation required absolute balance. Proximity risked psychic predation. Distance forfeited comprehension. Micro cliffhangers compounded relentlessly. Limbs twisting unnaturally, shadows mimicking, corridors warping, whispers reflecting unspoken fears. Every heartbeat tested cognitive, moral, and physical endurance. Warp energy surged from the chalice. Tendrils lashed violently, wrapping around Fenwick, Holloway, and myself. Luminescent growths fused sinew, flesh, and armor into grotesque patterns. Shadows twisted into partially human forms, mirroring movements while distorting reality. Whispers became unbearable, layering multiple voices, repeating thoughts not yet spoken. Micro cliffhangers assaulted sight, sound, and proprioception. Observation was now both weapon and shield. Every recorded anomaly could determine survival or assimilation. I forced myself forward, documenting each psychic spike, environmental distortion, and corporeal grafting event. Fenwick arched violently as the lattice pulsed, integrating him further. Holloway convulsed, twisting into grotesque alignment with the sinew metal lattice. The tech priest monitored psychic flux continuously, reporting readings beyond comprehension. Micro cliffhangers reinforced the feast's predatorily sentient intelligence, adaptive, ritualized, and lethal. Observation, discipline, and meticulous recording were the only safeguards against immediate destruction or transformation. The chalice's pulse dominated everything. Air, sound, and thought converged toward it. Gravity oscillated violently. Shadows flickered into humanoid forms, reflecting prior movements. Each anomaly was deliberate. Conditioning, testing, and adaptation. Every micro cliffhanger increased tension and exposed weakness, probing hesitation, fear, and moral compromise. The feast's apex intelligence now directly engaged us, assessing cognition, resolve, and discipline simultaneously. The hinge to the next chapter, full corporeal and psychic assimilation, begins, forcing the squad into irreversible transformations. Environmental, psychic, and bodily horror converge. Survival is uncertain. Observation and protocol may not suffice. Every hesitation, heartbeat, and decision carries permanent consequences. The next chapter promises the escalation of irreversible horror, moral and tactical crises, and direct confrontation with the feast's apex intelligence. The chalice's pulse had reached a frequency that reverberated through bone, sinew, and armor alike, a resonance that distorted perception and gnawed at cognition. Gravity convulsed violently, throwing boots from beneath us before slamming them down. Shadows stretched and twisted independently, forming humanoid parodies of ourselves. The whispers had coalesced into a singular, unrelenting command: submit, become one, serve the feast. Each syllable penetrated mind and marrow alike, tugging at fear, obedience, and morbid curiosity. The tech priest's manipulator arms trembled violently as he measured psychic flux. Exposure beyond this point is irreversible, he warned. I logged every anomaly meticulously, knowing that even hesitation could invite immediate predation. Scout Fenwick arched violently, luminescent growths along his spine, chest, and limbs weaving into sinew and metal, pulsing in perfect synchronization with the chalice. Sergeant Holloway screamed as tendrils fused grotesquely into his torso and spine, reshaping his body into alignment with the lattice. I fired my bolt pistol repeatedly, but kinetic energy was meaningless. The lattice absorbed and reconfigured each impact. The feast's intelligence was predatorily adaptive, responding instantly to thought, perception, and action. Micro-cliffhangers assaulted sight, sound, and proprioception, shadows leaping independently, whispers echoing unspoken thoughts, corridors stretching unpredictably. The floor beneath me rose in sinew metal ripples, attempting integration with my armor. I resisted, documenting environmental changes and psychic spikes with obsessive care. The tech priest extended manipulators toward the chalice, readings spiking beyond calibration. It evaluates intent, manipulates perception, and transforms organic matter, he warned. I logged coordinates, psychic flux, environmental anomalies, and squad responses with ritualistic precision. Observation was the only defense against the feast's predatorily sentient core. The chalice's pulse intensified, drawing air, sound, and thought toward it. The lattice synchronized gravity, temperature, spatial distortion, and corporeal grafting. Shadows flitted into humanoid forms, replaying prior movements in grotesque mimicry. Every prior anomaly, the sigils, chants, numeric patterns, revealed preparation and conditioning for apex confrontation. Observation, note-taking, and adherence to protocol had become survival mechanisms against the feast. Fenwick arched violently, fingers tracing sigils mid-air, pulsing in precise rhythm with the chalice. Luminescent growths integrated further into sinew, armor, and flesh. The feast now influenced the living fully. Holloway convulsed, spine twisting grotesquely under tendril pressure. Observation required absolute balance. Proximity risked psychic predation, distance forfeited comprehension. Micro-cliffhangers compounded relentlessly, limbs twisting unnaturally, shadows mimicking, corridors warping, whispers reflecting unspoken fears. Every heartbeat tested cognitive, moral, and physical endurance. Warp energy surged violently from the chalice, tendrils lashed at Fenwick, Holloway, and myself, fusing sinew, flesh, and armor in grotesque patterns. Shadows twisted into partially human forms, mirroring movements while distorting reality. Whispers layered multiple voices, repeating thoughts not yet voiced. Micro-cliffhangers assaulted all senses, disorienting and conditioning simultaneously. Observation became both weapon and shield. Every recorded anomaly could determine survival or assimilation. I forced myself forward, documenting psychic spikes, environmental distortions, and corporeal grafting events. Fenwick arched violently as the lattice pulsed, integrating him further. Holloway convulsed, twisting grotesquely into the sinew metal lattice. The tech priest monitored psychic flux continuously, reporting readings beyond comprehension. Micro-cliffhangers reinforced the feast's predatorily sentient intelligence, adaptive, ritualized, and lethal. Observation, discipline, and meticulous recording were the only safeguards against immediate destruction or transformation. The chalice's pulse dominated the chamber. Air, sound, and cognition converged toward it. Gravity oscillated violently. Shadows reflected prior movements. Each anomaly was deliberate, conditioning, testing, and adaptation. Every micro-cliffhanger increased tension, probing hesitation, fear, and moral compromise. The feast's apex intelligence now directly engaged us, assessing cognition, resolve, and discipline simultaneously. The hinge to the next chapter. Irreversible corporeal and psychic transformations accelerate, forcing full confrontation with the feast's apex intelligence. Environmental, psychic, and bodily horror converge simultaneously. Survival is uncertain. Observation alone may not suffice. Every hesitation, heartbeat, and decision carries permanent consequences. The next chapter promises escalation of irreversible horror, moral and tactical crises, and a direct confrontation that will irrevocably reshape body, mind, and squad cohesion. The chalice pulsed with a frequency that twisted perception and tore cognition apart. Gravity convulsed violently, throwing boots from beneath us and slamming them down unpredictably. Shadows stretched, contorted, and mirrored our movements grotesquely, forming semi-human parodies that leered and twisted in impossible geometries. The whispers had become a singular command, resonating through bone and sinew. Submit. Become one. Serve the feast. Each syllable pried at fear, obedience, and morbid curiosity, simultaneously. The tech priest's manipulator arms trembled as he measured psychic flux. Exposure beyond this point is catastrophic, irreversible, he warned. I logged every anomaly meticulously, knowing that hesitation or miscalculation could mean immediate assimilation. Scout Fenwick arched violently, luminescent growths along his spine, chest and limbs weaving into sinew and metal, pulsating with exact synchronization to the chalice. Sergeant Halloway screamed as tendrils fused grotesquely into his torso and spine, reshaping him into alignment with the lattice. Bolt pistol fire was futile. The lattice absorbed and reconfigured each strike. The feast's intelligence was predatorily adaptive, responding instantly to thought, perception, and action. Micro-cliffhangers assaulted every sense, shadows leaping independently, whispers repeating unspoken thoughts, corridors stretching and compressing unpredictably. The floor beneath me shifted, sinew and metal, attempting integration with my armor. I resisted, documenting environmental changes and psychic spikes with obsessive care. The tech priest extended manipulators toward the chalice. Readings spiked beyond calibration. It evaluates intent, manipulates perception, and transforms organic matter, he warned. I logged coordinates, psychic flux, environmental anomalies, and squad responses with ritualistic precision. Observation had become the only defense against the feast's predatorily sentient core. The chalice pulsed brighter, drawing air, sound, and cognition toward it. The lattice synchronized gravity, temperature, spatial distortion, and corporeal grafting. Shadows flitted into humanoid forms, replaying prior movements in grotesque mimicry. Every prior anomaly, the sigils, chants, numeric patterns, revealed preparation and conditioning for apex confrontation. Observation, note-taking, and adherence to protocol had become survival mechanisms against the feast. Fenwick arched violently, fingers tracing sigils mid-air, pulsing in precise rhythm with the chalice. Luminescent growths integrated further into sinew, armor, and flesh. The feast now fully influenced the living. Halloway convulsed, spine twisting grotesquely under tendril pressure. Observation required absolute balance. Proximity risked psychic predation. Distance forfeited comprehension. Micro-cliffhangers compounded relentlessly, limbs twisting unnaturally, shadows mimicking, corridors warping, whispers reflecting unspoken fears. Every heartbeat tested cognitive, moral, and physical endurance. Warp energy surged violently from the chalice. Tendrils lashed at Fenwick, Halloway, and myself, fusing sinew, flesh, and armor into grotesque, pulsating patterns. Shadows twisted into partially human forms, mirroring movements while distorting reality. Whispers layered multiple voices, repeating thoughts not yet vocalized. Micro-cliffhangers assaulted sight, sound, and proprioception. Observation became both weapon and shield. Every recorded anomaly could determine survival or assimilation. I forced myself forward, documenting psychic spikes, environmental distortions, and corporeal grafting events. Fenwick arched violently as the lattice pulsed, integrating him further. Halloway convulsed, twisting grotesquely into the sinew metal lattice. The tech priest monitored psychic flux continuously, reporting readings beyond comprehension. Micro-cliffhangers reinforced the feast's predatorily sentient intelligence. Adaptive, ritualized, and lethal. Observation, discipline, and meticulous recording were the only safeguards against immediate destruction or transformation. The chalice's pulse dominated everything. Air, sound, and thought converged toward it. Gravity oscillated violently. Shadows flickered into humanoid forms, reflecting prior movements. Each anomaly was deliberate, conditioning, testing, and adaptation. Every micro-cliffhanger increased tension, probing hesitation, fear, and moral compromise. The feast's apex intelligence now directly engaged us, assessing cognition, resolve, and discipline simultaneously. The hinge to the next chapter, irreversible corporeal and psychic assimilation, escalates to climax. Environmental, psychic, and bodily horror converge. Moral and tactical dilemmas intensify. The squad faces irreversible transformations. Observation alone is insufficient. Every hesitation, heartbeat, and decision carries permanent consequences. The final chapter promises culmination of horror, the full cost of engagement, and the lingering dread that remains even after the confrontation concludes. The chalice loomed above the throne, pulsing with a resonance that tore cognition, distorted perception, and gnawed at bone, sinew, and armor alike. Gravity oscillated violently, hurling boots from beneath us before slamming them down in unpredictable rhythm. Shadows stretched and twisted independently, forming semi-human parodies of ourselves that leered and convulsed in impossible geometries. The whispers had fused into one relentless litany: submit, become one, serve the feast. Each syllable clawed into mind and marrow, exploiting fear, obedience, and morbid curiosity. The tech priest's manipulator arms trembled uncontrollably as he measured psychic flux. Exposure now is total, irreversible, he warned. I logged every anomaly meticulously, knowing hesitation could mean immediate predation, assimilation, or worse. Scout Fenwick's body arched violently, luminescent growths along his spine, chest, and limbs fusing sinew and metal, pulsating with perfect synchronicity to the chalice. Sergeant Halloway screamed as tendrils wrapped around his torso and spine, reshaping his body grotesquely into alignment with the lattice. Bolt pistol fire was futile. The lattice absorbed and reformed each strike, mocking our resistance. The feast's intelligence had become predatorily adaptive, responding instantly to thought, perception, and action. Micro cliffhangers assaulted every sense, shadows leaping independently, whispers echoing unspoken thoughts, corridors stretching and compressing unpredictably. The floor beneath me rose in sinew metal ripples, attempting integration with my armor. I resisted, documenting environmental distortions, psychic spikes, and corporeal grafting with obsessive precision. The tech priest extended manipulators toward the chalice. Readings spiked beyond comprehension. It evaluates intent, manipulates perception, and assimilates matter and cognition, he warned. Coordinates, psychic flux, environmental anomalies, and squad responses were logged with ritualistic care. Observation had become the only defense against the feast's predatorily sentient core. The chalice pulsed brighter, drawing air, sound, and thought toward it. The lattice synchronized gravity, temperature, spatial distortion, and corporeal grafting. Shadows flitted into humanoid forms, replaying prior movements in grotesque mimicry. Every prior anomaly, the sigils, chants, numeric patterns revealed preparation, calibration, and conditioning for this apex confrontation. Observation, note-taking, and strict adherence to protocol had become survival mechanisms against the feast. Fenwick arched violently, fingers tracing sigils mid-air, pulsing in precise rhythm with the chalice. Luminescent growths expanded further, integrating sinew, armor, and flesh. The feast now fully dominated the living. Halloway convulsed, spine twisting grotesquely under tendril pressure. Observation required absolute balance. Proximity risked psychic predation. Distance forfeited comprehension. Micro cliffhangers compounded relentlessly, limbs twisting unnaturally, shadows mimicking, corridors warping, whispers reflecting unspoken fears. Every heartbeat tested cognitive, moral, and physical endurance. Warp energy surged from the chalice. Tendrils lashed violently, fusing sinew, flesh, and armor into grotesque, pulsating patterns. Shadows twisted into partially human forms, mirroring movements while distorting reality. Whispers layered multiple voices, repeating thoughts not yet vocalized. Micro cliffhangers assaulted all senses, disorienting and conditioning simultaneously. Observation became both weapon and shield. Every recorded anomaly could determine survival or assimilation. I forced myself forward, documenting each psychic spike, environmental distortion, and corporeal grafting event. Fenwick arched violently as the lattice pulsed, integrating him further. Halloway convulsed, twisting grotesquely into the sinew metal lattice. The tech priest monitored psychic flux continuously, reporting readings beyond comprehension. Micro cliffhangers reinforced the feast's predatorily sentient intelligence, adaptive, ritualized, and lethal. Observation, discipline, and meticulous recording were the only safeguards against immediate destruction or transformation. The chalice's pulse dominated everything. Air, sound, thought, and perception converged toward it. Gravity oscillated violently. Shadows flickered into humanoid forms reflecting prior movements. Each anomaly was deliberate: conditioning, testing, and adaptation. Every micro-cliffhanger increased tension, probing hesitation, fear, and moral compromise. The feast's apex intelligence now directly engaged us, forcing decisions that would permanently alter mind, body, and allegiance. In the final moments, I realized the cost of survival. Fenwick's body had become a lattice of sinew, metal, and luminous growth. Consciousness fragmented yet tethered to the chalice. Holloway convulsed grotesquely, fully integrated with the sinew-metal lattice, a cautionary monument to hesitation. I recorded the coordinates, readings, and every anomaly with obsessive care. Each breath, each heartbeat was a negotiation with predatorily sentient ritual. As I retreated, the chalice's pulse followed me, shadows flickering, whispers echoing, warp energy trailing. Survival came at the price of observation, documentation, and relentless discipline. The feast remained, sentient and adaptive, its influence stretching beyond comprehension. Its apex intelligence persisted, waiting for the next intrusion, the next curiosity, the next unwitting witness. The final image lingered in my vision, the chalice hovering, pulsing, untouched yet consuming, a singularity of horror and ritualized sentience, a predator in the void of comprehension. The hinge of finality, survival achieved, but cost total. The feast remains. Its apex intelligence endures. Shadows, whispers, and warp energy persist. Observation and protocol preserved life, but only barely, leaving an unhealed wound of comprehension, horror, and lingering dread. Coordinates logged. Report complete. The narrative of the Crusade turned into corpses concludes. Yet the feast waits, patient, intelligent, eternal. The lingering horror of the plague feast stretches beyond this chamber, its memory embedded into every observation and every surviving witness, a cosmic stinger that will never fade.